Hi, I'm Abhinav, and today I'll be talking about the various aspects of Korea and how Korea came to the way it is today. From February 8th, 1904 to September 5th, 1905, the Russo-Japanese War was fought between the Russian Empire and the Empire of Japan over rival imperial ambitions. The end of this war led to Japan further in its quest for land and resources and its sights set for Korea. Korea's traditional culture was very unique, and it provided a lot of insight to who they really were. A series of significant changes in agriculture, industry, and religion in Korea began in the mid-17th century and made a great impact on virtually every sector of Korean society during the beginning of the 18th century. Rice transportation became popular, and irrigation systems were improved. Advances in farming resulted in dramatic increases in food production and raised the standard of living for peasants. With the cultivation of special crops such as tobacco and ginseng, commerce and trade developed and further flourished. The government began minting coins and collecting farm rent in cash. Commerce, industry, and technology prospered greatly during this era. There's also a huge diversity in religion. North Korea worshipped religions such as Confucianism, Buddhism, Shamanism, which is the belief of ancestral spirits, and the minority of Christianity. South Korea, however, participated in practices such as Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. These religions all had an impact on the socio-cultural development of Korea. Government's involvement in dynasties, as well as kings, represented as leaders. The power remained in the hands of those in high positions, but mainly the Korean king. Japanese imperialism forced opposing groups to work together to drive the Japanese out. Afterwards, due to the eventual political differences in Korea, this led to Korea being split into North and South. North Korea believed in governing by communism, and the South believed in governing by the standard democratic constitution. Korea never wanted to be annexed by Japan, and Japan never asked for their take on the matter. However, Japan took Korea anyway from 1905 to the end of World War II. Not only did Japan take Korea over, they did not treat the Koreans well, which later led to major issues between the two countries. Korean imperialism was driven by the Japanese occupation of Korea. Even though the Japanese occupation of Korea was harsh and rough, Japan helped Korean imperialists to expand and completely modernize Korea in many ways. For example, Korea industry prospered due to the railroads and communications. Agricultural advances are also occurring during Japanese occupation of Korea. Even though Japanese influence helped Korea's industry and commerce flourish, Japan's harsh rules restricted and restrained Korean culture. Japanese colonialism was dominant for the Koreans who lived there. Any hope of a rebellion early on was quickly rushed by the ruthless Japanese military. However, Japanese rule relaxed somewhat after a nationwide protest on their damaging, obsessive methods. Benefits such as the rapid urban growth, expansion of commerce, and mass culture forms, a widespread of racial cinema, became staple parts of Korean societies. After eventually, the Japanese surrendered to the Chinese in a war between the two. The Koreans were forced to work in factories and fight as soldiers. However, Korea's most important and positive impactful contact with the imperialism was when Japan annexed the peninsula and took them over without their consent. This was important because not only did their leaders change, the country was literally merged into Japan. The very base of Korea's government, political, and economical pillars were built on Japan ideology. So Korea changed its political structure without Japan ever approving it. Japan originally claimed that they signed a treaty agreeing to this. However, in the record shown today, it was revealed that there were no official formal agreement between the two. Japan annexed Korea for a very considerable amount of time. And despite their best efforts to lessen Japan's cruel behavior against them, the Sino-Japanese War broke out between the Qing dynasty and Japan over Korea. This war caused major difficulties for men and women alike, who were forced to assist the Japanese in their affairs as the soldiers, as well as comforting their women. Tens of thousands of people were drafted and forced to work in various harsh conditions until they fed up with their mistreatment. When Shanghai was captured by Japan, the Korean government finally took part in the war against Japan with the organization of the Korean Restoration Army. This army consisted of independence fighters in China, and with the help of Allied forces and Japan surrendered in 1945, 35 years of Japanese control had finally ended. A major event that occurred during Korea's decolonization was the creation of the 38th parallel. The United Nations started noticing the mistreatment of Korean people and wanted to intervene. As a result, 16 nations were led to a war with North Korea. UN troops began pushing North Korea forces back until they reached the border between China and South Korea. China felt threatened and assisted North Korea. After many grueling months of fighting, the UN was forced back into the 30th parallel. Eventually, a ceasefire agreement was signed between the nations, and a pact was later signed to declare the 30th parallel as a dividing point between the two countries. This marked as a moment when the lines between the two countries, South Korea, were established indefinitely. For long-term impacts on Korea, modernization heavily influenced Korea in a positive way. However, as the Japanese kept its best efforts to imperialize Korea, Korean economy depleted, and as a result, many people were poor due to the lack of support from Japan. Korea's environment was poor quality, and as well, minimum wages and poor payment made Korea feel like a state of despair, especially with North Korea as well. In the present-day times, United States, Japan cooperation for the defense of South Korea became so close that some specialists said it created a virtual alliance among the three countries, and have credited it with deterring war in East Asia, despite North Korea's steady pursuit of nuclear weapons and regular flare-ups and crises, such as in the early 2003 and 2009. Despite major conflicts in the past between the South Koreans and the Japanese, and due to their close proximity to each other, the dangers they faced with North Korea, they have begun to accept each other, as countries continue to prosper and advance themselves for generations and generations.